An undivided Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Boy, the lectionary is not making it easy this morning. Before COVID closed down restaurants and got me out of the habit, I had developed a Sunday tradition. It was my way of putting last week's preparation and sermon and readings behind me and taking my mind off of it and having a break, taking a nap, and then getting ready for the next week. The tradition was, after Sunday service was over, I liked to get lunch, preferably at a Mexican restaurant, and then have a beer. And one Sunday I was sitting in Abuelita's, I was getting ready to order my usual order, and I noticed this couple who had visited church the first time that morning. They were sitting about 12 feet away from us, and they could see us, line of sight. Everything I was eating and ordering. It was Margaret and Terry Hopkins. What should I do? These folks have been in a Baptist church for 70 years. I can't order my traditional order. And then I stopped myself. I suddenly felt a little dirty. It's easy to fall back into old habits. Of course, there's no problem with trying to set an example or thinking about, the weaker brother or sister, as Paul says, but that wasn't what was going on in my heart. And I decided I'm not having 20, I'm having one. And I had planned to do this. In fact, this is my tradition. I'm not going to change my plan just because I'm worried about someone judging me. So I ordered the beer, I ate my lunch, and Margaret and Terry came back to church. Months later, I was talking to Terry, and he told me, we really enjoyed our first visit to Emmanuel, but when we saw you drinking that beer at that restaurant, it sealed the deal. Authenticity is important. Integrity matters. And I know my example might be silly, but it has the virtue of being honest. If you've spent any time in certain kinds of churches, I bet at some point you've also had that sick feeling I described. Maybe you were walking into a movie and you noticed your pastor out of the corner of your eye. And of course, it's not all bad. It's good to be able to see ourselves through other people's eyes. It's good to remember there's someone always looking up to us. Each of us has someone looking up to us. But the problem is when it crosses the line into keeping up appearances. When honesty is replaced by putting on a good show of spirituality. And this game, this culture I'm attempting to describe to you is why so many people I grew up with quit going to church and will never darken the doors of a church again. Saying hypocrite as they walk out the door. I want you to hear me say that the church, of all places, should be a place where you can be honest. I grew up singing this song all the time, just as I am. Where you can come just as you are, wherever that happens to be, and seek God in safe community. It should be a place, a community where everyone encourages you to be authentic. I try to be the same person on Sunday that I am Monday through Saturday. And I hope that you do that too. And I hope you feel the freedom and the obligation to do it. For the last 2 weeks, we've been hearing Jesus' most notable and powerful teaching, something today we call the Sermon on the Mount. And last Sunday, Jesus told us we should be salt and light, that we should follow the law, the heart of the law, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, love your neighbor as yourself. And last week, I told you that Jesus was calling us to be weirdos, to stand out in a good way from the people around us. And this week we continue in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is calling us to do that, to be weird, to stand out like salt and light. And our gospel reading this morning tells us if you want to be weird, if you want to be salt and light, then be authentic. Be the same person 7 days a week. Be the same person on the inside that you are on the outside. He tells us to have an undivided life. And the first area, and I want to talk about what that means at the end, but the first area he addresses is probably the most difficult. Anger. Our anger. He says, you've heard that it was said, do not murder, but I tell you, do not be angry. Jesus wants us to have integrity. And it's great. It's wonderful if you have never murdered anyone in anger. I assume that applies to everyone here, but who knows? But let's be honest. It's a sign of a big problem if you do feel enough anger and hate that you could murder someone. Anger is one of the 7 deadly sins, and I've heard it said that it's the hardest to get rid of because we like to be angry. Anger gives us a sense of control. It makes us feel good. It gives us a feeling of self-righteousness. And Jesus is not talking about the natural reactions of our heart. It's normal. It's good. If you see injustice, if you see someone being treated unfairly, that you would feel angry. It's good. It's normal. But Jesus is talking about what do we do with that natural anger after that? Do we nurse our anger long enough so that it leads to hate? If we do, Jesus says that's a problem. But he gives us a solution: reconciliation. He says if you're on your way to offer your gift at the altar and they remember somebody has something against you, leave your gift at the altar and go and be reconciled. And Jesus is exaggerating to make the point memorable. He's preaching in Galilee. Galilee at the time is a 3-day walk to Jerusalem. So imagine you're there, you've got your dove in your hand, you're walking to the altar to hand it to the priest, and you remember that argument you had with Fred. So you get out your rope and you tie it to the bird's ankle, tie it to the altar, walk back to Galilee. Hey, Fred, we need to work this out. Jesus is exaggerating to make a point, but he's being serious that this is the way we deal with anger. And we have a liturgical reminder of it every Sunday. When we say, the peace of the Lord be always with you, and everyone says, also with you. And that is not supposed to be the greeting time. It's great that we're greeting each other, and we should greet everyone, especially the people around you who you see nobody greeting. But the real purpose of that is a liturgical reminder of this verse, that this is our chance to reconcile. before we approach the altar. If there's someone that you see, it's supposed to be that you could straighten it out with, you've got about 2 minutes to do it. That's why I say it's just a reminder. You see, this is how anger doesn't become hate, and hate doesn't become murder. Don't let it fester. Talk about it. Work through it. Don't hide it. Don't let it control you. Jesus told us the greatest commandment is equal to loving God is to love your neighbor as yourself. He teaches over and over that your relationships with other people matter as much as your relationship with God. And then he keeps going, and he goes on to say, you have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery, but I tell you, do not lust. Jesus, once again, isn't talking about natural human attraction. We all notice when someone is attractive, right? But he's saying, what do you do with it from there? And he exaggerates to make his point when he talks about cutting off your arm or gouging out your eyes. And we know this because it was against the law of Moses for a Jewish person even to get a tattoo. So they knew he wasn't being literal when he told them, gouge out your eye or cut off your hand. But Jesus is serious. That unchecked lust, like unchecked anger, leads us to places we don't want to go. He also talked about divorce. And the problem Jesus was combating was women being treated as property. At this time in history, women have zero legal rights when it comes to marriage or divorce. A man could simply divorce his wife by saying, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, for any reason as simple as burning the bread. And if you've been married, you know that could happen on any random Tuesday. Not the burning the bread, the anger part. And women who were divorced had few options. They could either be remarried if they could find someone who would accept the dishonor of marrying them because that's the way their culture worked. They could return to their family if their family would accept the dishonor of receiving them back. Or they could become prostitutes. And that's why Jesus says, causes to become an adulteress. And we always fail to notice, especially those who have built a lot of rules around this passage, that Jesus puts the responsibility of that on the men who are taking advantage of the system, who treated their wives and their covenant flippantly. He says, whoever does this causes them to do it. In other words, the responsibility and the burden and the guilt are on them. The church throughout the ages has done so much damage to people by twisting Jesus' words in this passage. Jesus is not, everyone say, is not teaching that divorce is an unforgivable sin. He was not teaching that everyone who's been divorced commits adultery. He's trying to get men who had all the legal powers in this world to realize what they're doing, to wake up. And in the same way that this way of approaching divorce treats women as property, so too lust, unchecked, treats people as objects. The idea is, once again, to be in right relationship with God and each other. Finally, Jesus says, you've heard that it was said, if you swear by the temple, it means more, but I tell you, just let your yes be yes and your no be no. It was common for people to swear by something holy to add what weight to what they were saying, that this small thing impacts relationships still. He says, if you want to have good relationships with your neighbors, with your families, just do what you say you're going to do, or say that you won't do it. Jesus has the audacity this morning to challenge us to make our internal and our external selves be the same. Most popular religion and philosophy from the time of Plato until now says that we've got the physical world and it's bad, and the spiritual world and it's good. In our lives, in America, we call this our public world and our private world, or our secular lives and our spiritual lives. And because we've trained ourselves to think this way, this is what we hear Jesus saying. We hear, don't be angry, don't lust, don't swear. And we hear Jesus saying the only thing that matters is your heart. But this passage should disturb us a little, because Jesus is not saying that physical or external things are irrelevant and bad, and internal spiritual things are good. He's just saying, and he's not saying if you just get in touch with your deepest emotions that you'll discover contentment, because sometimes our emotions are the problem. Jesus is simply saying that good and bad external actions come from good and bad internal motivations. In other words, you can't blame just one part of you for something you do wrong. You can't just get in touch with your feelings and fix it. Jesus is saying the problem is the separation. The problem is the compartmentalization. If you don't want to become a murderer, check your anger. If you don't want to be an adulterer, check your lust. The truth is, and if you want people to take you at your word, let your yes be yes and your no be no. The truth is, we don't have a secular life or a spiritual life, a public life, and a private life, an external life, and an internal life. We just have life. One life. And it's all spiritual. And it's all related to God and neighbor. And it should all be the same, as much as we can make it be. And so the good news is we get to do what Episcopalians and Anglicans always get to do. We get to practice. Everyone say practice. Practice. So, and I want you to repeat after me again in just a second. As long as you are breathing, your body and your soul are tied together. And wouldn't it be great if they were on the same page? And wouldn't it be great if your church community helped you accomplish that? So everyone repeat after me. The church has to be a place where I can come and seek God just as I am. If we realize we all have the freedom to move closer to God, and if we give each other the freedom to start wherever we are, you might not struggle with anything Jesus addressed in our gospel this morning. And you might like to have a beer with your Mexican food. That's okay. But let's just be honest about it. And let's know that Jesus wants us to be. And when we fall down, let's just keep practicing.